This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? If you live in Michigan, probably not. And that owes directly to the actions of Governor Gretchen Whitmer during the pandemic. Today, I'd like to talk about how Big Gretch spent her pandemic. This week, Whitmer tried to rewrite history on CNN in a primetime interview with Jake Tapper. It's funny, when you talk to political consultants on the GOP side, they always tell you that people are over lockdowns in the pandemic. Then when you get back to the real world, you see a big-time journalist like Jake Tapper ask a big-time politician like Gretchen Whitmer about it, and the public watches these segments with great interest. It turns out the consultants are all wrong. Your instincts are all right. People are not over what happened 4 years ago. Why would they be when those choices and those events affect them to this day? The consultant class, meanwhile, they've never missed a day of work on their laptops. But your life hasn't been as good as it was in March 2020 when the world stopped moving. For the consultants, their livelihoods were never at risk. They don't know the people whose livelihoods were at risk. The view from their six-figure bubble is that everything is fine and everybody inside it has moved on. To say otherwise would make them class traitors in their comfortable suburbs. Any residual anger would be too closely associated with the rabble, the Wolverine watchman, the Donald Trump voter, for their taste. Continued social standing and continued invites to the Solstice Party are contingent on repeating the line, everybody has moved on. Well, 4 years later, Jake Tapper has not moved on. He asked Gretchen Whitmer her do differently from the pandemic. Here's what she said.
Would you have done anything different?
Oh, yeah. If I could go in a time machine with the knowledge we've accumulated and make different decisions along the way, sure. I think any leader worth their salt would say the same thing. None of us knew what we were confronting. It was a novel virus. We were building the plane as we were flying it in 50 different states, 50 different policies, and we had a White House that was not only disseminating misinformation, but they were pitting us against one another by telling us to go find our own masks and gloves. I talk about that in the book, this kind of Hunger Games style race that each of us was in just to get masks and gloves for our doctors and nurses when our hospitals were overwhelmed. So sure, I mean, knowing what we know now, if I could go back, I would certainly do some things different, but I'm proud of what we did. And I can tell you, the people of Michigan, I think, by and large, we got through this as well as we could, and we're seeing our economy growing, and there's a lot of good stuff going on, but it was a tough time.
That stuff at the beginning about building the plane while they were flying it, not true. Actually, everything Whitmer said in the clip was untrue. We didn't know COVID was respiratory in nature. We thought it would affect young people more than old people. None of that is remotely true. We didn't know it was respiratory. Well, why else would we need respirators in such large numbers? But we need not just honor logic here. We can take Whitmer's own words for it. In a March 13th, 2020 executive order, Whitmer said, and I quote, "Patients with confirmed injection have reportedly had mild to severe respiratory illness with symptoms of fever, cough, and shortness of breath." Whitmer's order suggested that COVID be treated like an influenza virus. Her order continued, "The best prevention for viruses such as influenza, the common cold, or COVID-19, and remember, just a month or two later, to compare COVID to the common cold or to the flu was like you could get thrown off social media, like you might lose your house. I know a guy who lost his wife saying that stuff. It was pretty serious back then. Anyway, it said, if you think you've been exposed to COVID, call your healthcare provider. If you don't have one, call the nearest hospital. Avoid hands, eyes, and mouth, blah, blah, blah. Avoid contact with people who are sick. If you are sick, stay home and avoid contact with others. Replace handshakes with elbow bumps and stay at least 6 feet away from others when in a public setting." 4 years after the madness of 2020, why would our governor, why would the true Gretch herself, why would she go on CNN and lie about the nature of the virus? What it means is that at this late date, ignorance is the best defense of lockdowns. Gretchen Whitmer is the politician in America most identified with lockdowns. 4 years later, even after winning re-election by double digits, The best defense of it she can offer is that she didn't know what she was doing. Team Reality, take a bow. We won. We trusted the evidence of our eyes and ears, and we distrusted the people who demanded absolute power. We were right all along, and we lived to tell the tale. If you're listening to this podcast, congrats. You have great taste. You were on Team Reality. The truth won out, and you were one of the people speaking it. It speaks well of you. As a journalist, you have to learn to find the truth, even in an untruthful statement. You have to be able to read between the lines. So when Whitmer says we didn't know the virus was respiratory in nature, what she really means is this. If they said publicly that it were respiratory, if you thought of it as respiratory, you never would have accepted lockdowns, because it would be too obvious that no government action could eliminate or even knock down a respiratory virus that travels airborne, no matter how many people stayed home and stayed safe. You would also know that as people built up immunity to the virus, by catching it, the virus would weaken in strength. Your instinct would not be to do what we were told in 2020, which was to stay home and wait for a vaccine to roll out. Lockdowns were a direct affront to everything we knew and know about how to respond to a virus and about our constitutional rights as Michiganders and as Americans. Staying home, afraid, out of the sun, not working out, and ordering DoorDash is not anyone's recommended health plan. But that's exactly what we were told to do in 2020. Stay home, stay safe, and let someone poorer than you deliver your food. Oh, and be sure to tip well. But if COVID was the killer they claimed, we were asking DoorDash drivers, were we not to assume insane amounts of risk just to deliver our food? If that were true, if COVID were the killer, the humane message wouldn't be to tip well, it would be to stop ordering in. So it's clear now at this late date, I thought so then, but it should be clear to you regardless of what you thought in 2020. It's clear that lockdowns have nothing to do with science and everything to do with political science. We can all say it out loud now. You won't be banned, deplatformed, or get so much as a mean tweet. These days, I've found that lockdown defenders are about as quiet as church mice. I was never big on claims that the 2020 election was stolen. We talked about this last episode. I have a rule about things. I don't talk about stuff that will never happen. So let's say the election had been 1,000% stolen. The problem therein is that there's no recourse. If something can't be fixed, complaining about the problem just makes you look weak. If ever you are throwing a pity party, don't invite me. But then, February 2021, after Biden won the election, the left just couldn't help itself. They took a victory lap in the pages of Time magazine. After an election so doubtful that people stormed the U.S. Capitol to dispute it, the left bragged openly about fortifying the election. They never said they stole it, even though people took it that way. Here's what they did say. Their work touched every aspect of the election. They got states to change voting systems and laws and help secure hundreds of millions in public and private funding. They fended off voter suppression lawsuits, recruited armies of poll workers, and got millions of people to vote by mail for the first time. They successfully pressured social media companies to take a harder line against disinformation and use data-driven strategies to fight viral smears. They executed national public awareness campaigns that helped Americans understand how the vote count would unfold over days or weeks, preventing Trump's conspiracy theories and false claims of victory from getting more traction. After Election Day, they monitored every pressure point to ensure that Trump could not overturn the result. What's described there is the left pulling every lever it could to remove Donald Trump from the White House. But I believe Donald Trump had bigger problems than just the left in 2020. The entire political class was and is out for him. In 2016, Donald Trump committed a heresy. It's unforgivable in Washington politics. He made everybody look like fools. This includes the House of Clinton, the House of Bush, consultants for both parties, the White House reporter who play acts as an expert on politics when he goes home for Thanksgiving. He put egg on all of those faces. These are prideful, self-regarding people, and he made them all look bad. Democrats, Republicans, and the media, all of them together. How do you think that kind of thing plays? By doing the impossible, Trump made them all out to be liars. He exposed them as just guessing. 8 years later, it almost cost him his life. If the left was willing to pull those levers that it has admitted to, it makes you wonder how many they left out. It's clear to me that the months-long lockdowns across the Midwest were a coordinated effort. Call it regime change by executive order. Simply put, the plan in 2020 was to make you so miserable that you throw your hands up. So tired of the constant breaking news banners and alerts on your phone. So tired of the mean tweets that you decide old Joe would be an easier choice. The Biden era would be a return to a simpler time when adults were adults. Yeah, lockdowns were the real steal. Donald Trump likes to say that the Democrats aren't really after him. They're after you, but he's standing in the way. It's a good line. After July 13th, it certainly feels true. But lockdown showed us that things work in both directions. Lockdowns are when the ruling class went after the everyday American to get to Donald Trump. What do you do if you can't beat a guy? You beat his supporters until they're demoralized. You promote every angry utterance of the man, knowing that this will turn off the men who see themselves as decent and honest and Christian. You promote his locker room talk, knowing that this will turn off everything but the most strident of Republican women. And you treat the man as dirt, as an enemy of the state, as baby Hitler. And then when the public still supports the guy, you treat those people as enemies of the state, as unhumans. 2020 offered the perfect forum. When they go outside and violate the governor's precious orders, you ticket them. When they open the doors of their businesses, you padlock them. When they demand freedom, you insult them. You make it clear the beatings will continue until the people are too demoralized to fight back. These were the tactics that were applied in Michigan to secure the 2020 election for Joe Biden. 4 years later, Whitmer still can't bring herself to say, I'm sorry for lockdowns, nursing homes, school closures, anything. Instead, she says, I'm proud of what we did, though she didn't say exactly what she's proud of. Fun fact, 75% of people who died with COVID were 65 or older. This could have been expected with a respiratory virus, and as I showed, we knew it was that then. So Whitmer's COVID response with the elderly in particular, it was marred by two mistakes, and they were both fatal. The first is indifference, and the second was commingling the sick and elderly with the merely elderly. 3 out of every 4 people who died with COVID were old. Were 3 out of every 4 executive orders in Michigan about the elderly? 3 out of 4 press conferences? Or did Whitmer spend most of her time in political capital ordering around normal, healthy people, locking them out of their jobs and their livelihoods? In 2020, a federal survey found that 32% of respondents in Michigan reported that the government mandated that their business close at some point in the year. It was by far the highest rate in America. This was our governor actively crippling our economy. When patriots did see something and say something, Whitmer threatened to extend lockdowns. When business owners like Ian Murphy decided to keep slinging brisket, as he did at Iron Pig Smokehouse in Gaylord, when Carl the Barber kept cutting hair, Whitmer sent the full weight of the state after them. Police paid visits. They wrote tickets and they made threats, and when that didn't work, the state came for their occupational licenses. If Carl the Barber was in a nursing home, Whitmer would have sent a sick person into his building. But working at his barbershop, thank God he had his health, for customers who assumed the risk of being there, made him a literal enemy of the state. As Whitmer said at one press conference, these were executive orders, not just helpful hints. Yeah, lockdowns were the real steal. 4 years later, they have no defenders. They were a castle made of sand. They were never an arguable point. They were fiction the entire time. We now know that social distancing, the idea that we needed to stay 6 feet apart, was completely made up. And we now see that the original guidance was that people who were sick should stay home and avoid contact with others. How did everything change within the space of 3-4 days, within a week? How did we throw away everything we knew about how man and society deals with bugs and flus and illness, which says that if you are sick, you do stay home because you're not well enough to perform and you might get others sick? That's how we always had done it. This business of stay home and stay safe was new, and it was all fake. There was never a reason to believe that all 10 million people in Michigan needed to react the same way to the virus. There was no place on the planet that had locked down successfully and saw COVID just go away. Overnight, we tossed out critical thinking and bravery. Grown men became comfortable saying they were afraid to catch the cold. They asked Big Gretch to keep them safe, and they called her Big Gretch when she obliged. It was all pathetic. Neighbors got comfortable calling the police on one another. Shoppers got comfortable attacking each other in the halls of the store. They'd stand within spitting distance of anyone who wasn't wearing a mask and scream loudly at them, as one does when you're trying to stop the spread of a respiratory virus. And police, the people we entrust to protect and serve us, they were allowed to embrace their worst instincts. The kind of person who wants to become a cop is the kind of person who wants to go around in life correcting people. The want to protect others must be learned and earned with time. But the want to correct, that's the initial instinct. Bob Dylan said, "Staying one step ahead of the persecutor within." And it spoke to a human struggle within us all. We all want to be the person with the stick in our hand beating others. No group of people struggles with that instinct more than cops, the guys who drive around with guns and handcuffs. It's too much power for most men. Left to be their worst selves, police took down basketball hoops, taped up playground facilities, and used drones to make sure nobody was getting too much sun and vitamin D, all for the sake of your health. Nobody asked if staying home meant staying safe for the woman in a violent relationship or the child whose only getaway was a school building. There wasn't room for them in the narrative, so nobody cared. Overnight, we decided that no other illness on earth existed. Breast cancer treatments, physical therapy, surgery. No can do. Not in the middle of a pandemic. This was not acting with an abundance of caution, and we won't let history be bent that way. We can't let the story of lockdowns be watered down to mistakes were made. The COVID response was myopia to the point of evil, all in service of regime change. We have to remember how far we fell in 2020, how few questions we and our media asked along the way. Ronald Reagan said decades ago that freedom is just one generation from slipping away. I'd argue that we saw in 2020 it could take as little as one executive order. So no, consultants, I have not gotten over lockdowns, and I hope I never do. There's no such thing as a small encroachment. See, free doesn't come with asterisks or terms and conditions. It's a God-given state. It's man as he is designed to be. You're free until someone takes your freedom from you. Who's going to come take it? Watch Gretchen Whitmer talk for 2 minutes on any topic, even her family, and you'll see the folly of 2020. The thought that that lady, who works in Lansing, has the answers for a global virus, just say it out loud, should never have crossed your mind. The thought that if that lady pulled this lever or that one, the numbers would change like some kind of machine at the Willy Wonka factory. You believe that? We can blame Whitmer. We can note that when she felt power in her hand, she didn't want to give it up. We can note that when our neighbors spoke up for freedom in our constitutional system, she demonized them. We can note that she tried to ruin lives and livelihoods. Yeah, mistakes were made. But in 2020, True Gretch taught us the truth of an old line. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. So we know how Gretchen Whitmer spent her pandemic. shredding our Constitution while spreading fear. My question now is, how'd you spend yours? When Trump said and Whitmer repeated that we need 15 days to stop the spread, what did you say? Were you reasonable? Did you tell others to be reasonable? How'd that go for you? Did you learn that you can't be a little bit unfree, that it all goes away at once? What have you learned? And what will you say next time? Because there will be a next time. I'd love to hear your stories. Join me on Twitter X. I'm at DownI75. Use the hashtag 2020lessons and tell me what you've learned from surviving a pandemic.